Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Town of Ajax Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for Wednesday, May 5th, 2021. This meeting is being held electronically and live streamed on the internet. All staff and committee members are participating by phone or video. All regular practices and procedures of the committee continue to apply during the electronic meeting. If we encounter any technical difficulties through this meeting, we may take a brief recess while they're resolved. Thank you for your patience. We will now proceed with the meeting. Are there any conflicts of interest from committee members with any items to be discussed this evening? I see several nodding. No, so seeing none, thank you. Next up, we will be looking for the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting, which occurred on April 7th, 2021. Can I have a motion to adopt, please?
I would like to move that the minutes of the April 7th, 2021 meeting be accepted as posted, barring any errors or omissions.
Thank you, Stephen. Do I have someone to second?
Sure, I'll second.
Bev seconds. All in favor? Thank you very much. That is carried. So moving along with our agenda items, we'll start with the presentation and discussion items. So I will turn over to Mike for 4.1 and 4.2 and the one additional item that is a late addition as well that he will fill us in on.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so good evening, everyone. I'll start with the first item, which is the Kingston Road, 244 Kingston Road East, the heritage permit application for exterior signage. This is a property we've talked about several times in the past, so it's just the latest update on this one. This is part of the RioCan holdings at Salem and Kingston Road, and all of you are familiar with this building, the McKay House, or McKay House, which is a designated property in the town. So a couple months ago, I provided updates, including these renderings, which had been provided by the applicant and showed very modern signage on the building, which wasn't necessarily in keeping with the heritage character, but did have some positive attributes. So this is a shot from the other side as well. Now, the issues that we really had with the first round of application was that the signs that were being proposed were all very modern materials and had modern lighting treatment, things like backlit signage, and even some uplighting, which is actually prohibited within the town. The applications also didn't include information such as the size of the signs, which was going to be critical to getting permissions from the Heritage Committee. So the applicant was actually asked to consider more traditional type heritage signings, such as those signs that you see featured on this slide, things like sandblasted cedar signs. In the end, they came back with what I think is a very good treatment. So they will be making the signs out of barn board, cedar barn board, and actually etching or carving the logo for the restaurant that'll be going in there. And then rather than having these signs backlit or uplit or anything like that, they'll be including 3 gooseneck lights on either side of the buildings to illuminate the signage, which is very much in keeping with our policies throughout the town for heritage signage. These slides here just show all of the details that we were provided in terms of the how the signs will be fixed to the building in both locations. So the heritage approval or the permit approval was issued on April 26th. Now that is conditional upon them getting a sign permit from the town's building department. And as part of the heritage approval, we've also asked that the applicants make efforts to ensure that the signs are actually anchored through the mortar joints rather than the masonry units themselves. So that's just to ensure If these are ever removed, there won't be damage to a number of the stones. However, the issue we have here is that this is a random course masonry building. So it's not as easy as just, picking certain areas where they can anchor into all the joints. It's a bit of a puzzle in that sense. So we've approached it as a request to the applicant to do their best, but we do recognize that they may actually have to drill in through a couple of those units. Any questions before we move along from this one? Nope. Okay, so I'll jump into the new item, and this is something that just came up last week, and it was a demolition permit for the property at 759 Kingston Road West. So this is a really unique property in the sense that it actually has no frontage on any road. Historically, it would have had frontage onto Kingston Road, but over the years with different land divisions, it's now a landlocked parcel that's very difficult to access. It exists at the very western edge of the town. So the intersection that you could just barely see on the screen here is Kingston Road and Notion Road. So this building here was the old Rona building, and there's I think sort of like a small car dealership here at 777, which is actually on our heritage inventory. The rest of Pickering Village is right over the bridge here when you head east. When you zoom in and look at this property more closely, you can see that there is in fact an older home that's located at the very northwest corner of the property. So as soon as I received this demolition application, I realized that I was going to have to get out to the site to get some images and see the kind of shape that this building is actually in. So as I mentioned, this application was received late last week, Thursday, April the 29th. And typically when these applications come in, the first thing I do is I look at our heritage mapping to determine whether or not this represents a heritage property. So the image you see on here is from our mapping system. The properties outlined in red with the yellow triangles are designated properties. And then the properties you see with the thick blue outline are on our heritage inventory. So they're non-designated properties, but we do think they have heritage value. The subject property I have highlighted in red down here, but it's neither designated nor on the heritage inventory. And the reason it's not on the inventory is because we've never actually been able to get out to the site and inspect it, because you'd have to travel through private property. And I had made attempts in the past through the owner to set up an appointment, but it never went through. So when this came in and I recognized which property it was, I remembered that in my travels through the town, particularly during the winter, I had been able to see a gable sticking out through the trees back on this house here. So I always knew that there was something to be evaluated if we did ever receive any application. So that's the reason that I wanted to go out to the site. And also because if there is a heritage resource on these properties, we obviously need to consult with the Heritage Advisory Committee prior to signing off on any demolition. So this was quite interesting for me. Like I said, this was probably the only heritage building, or maybe one of two or three in town that I hadn't actually seen, that I had always been hoping to visit. So when I got out to the site, it was very much as I expected. You could see in terms of its massing that there was a heritage building there, but there's been a lot of change for this building over time. And it's not necessarily in the state it would have been, 100 years ago. There's been a number of changes that have altered this building. So this is the view looking northeast. And if you head around to the back, you can see that it's at least the historic portion, which is this front portion here, is quite symmetrical. And then you have this offset rear addition at the back here. So when looking at this building, there's probably one thing that stands out to all of us as being, interesting or somewhat different from what we're used to seeing. and that would be these gables up here. So these, rather than just having the straight up gable and having that triangular form there, you've got this hipped portion that comes down, and this is what's called a jerkin head gable. So this is, it's not really a common building feature, but in Pickering Village, it is a fairly common feature. So there are a number of buildings that share this, which makes it quite interesting, at least from a local perspective. So this is a designated building on Mill Street called the Glen, which you can see has very similar proportions and the jerkin heads on both sides. This is one on Church Street South at 86. Another one here, this is now operating as a veterinary clinic out on Kingston Road near Rotherglen. And you even see this feature incorporated into some of the most beautiful contemporary architecture that we have in the town. This modern plaza here, which incorporates jerkin heads as well. So you can see that there was obviously enough interest in them to influence architecture right through the time, almost up to modern day, which is quite neat. You know, going out to the site, I really didn't expect to find anything like that. But with all that said, I mean, I mentioned the state of this building, and pretty much everything has been altered over time. There are a few original elements that remain. One of the other interesting things that I found, you know, really ties this building back to its former context is the fact that this side here is now considered the rear of the building. You go in through the main door over on this side. However, this is the side that would have looked out originally to Kingston Road. So you have a bit of an elevated architectural treatment with this central dormer window, which I think we've seen on a number of properties, historic properties through Pickering Village. So although this was once the front, over time, as this became landlocked and became accessed from a different pathway, this became the rear of the building. And to this day, I mean, you can see this outbuilding built tight up against it. So no appreciation for the original context of this building. I did a little bit of historic research to see what I could come up with. And this is the map of the Pickering Township from the 1877 County Atlas. And I've overlaid the streets here just to give you a better sense of exactly where we are. The area in pink at the very top is the more urban part of Pickering Village. But what's quite interesting here is you do see this little dot where we have the building I was out at yesterday. So the house is shown, this is from 1877. We do have records saying it was constructed around 1875. So that corresponds with that information. And it shows that it was on a property owned by T. O'Leary. Now, there's a number of O'Learys that pop up through the town's history. The O'Leary family, in particular, Timothy O'Leary, was one of the first Irish settlers in Audley. So whether or not this is the same gentleman, we can't know for sure. So there are some good ties to the local history there, but in terms of anything that really stands out about the O'Leary family as being, you know, more prominent than others, there's not that much. They were one of the early families and well regarded for that fact, but no ties to any former mayors or things like that as far as I can tell. So a couple things we do know about the property. As I mentioned, it was likely built in 1875. And because that mapping in 1877 is so close to the date it was constructed, it is most likely that it would have been built by this gentleman, T. O'Leary. The original portion of the building seems to be still intact in terms of its general massing, but there's really no original building fabric left other than a couple of windows that look to have some age to them. There have been significant changes to the layout of the first floor, both internally, but also on some of the earlier photos, you would have seen the large sort of picture windows and sliding doors. None of that obviously was original. Very few exterior heritage features, just as few interior features, which I'll get to in a moment. And the building's actually in quite poor condition for the most part. And as we mentioned, it's been entirely separated from its original context of being in Pickering Village. So upon entry into the building, there's a pathway down to the basement. It's a little tough to see here, but the basement's entirely flooded out. When talking to the property owner currently, he said the building's been unoccupied and essentially locked up for a year. Continues to get worse and worse in terms of its state of repair. And it's at the point now where his priority is to demolish the building just so that it doesn't continue to be a site that's vandalized and that people try to get into, and that'll just continue to decay over time. This is the first room you enter on the main floor when you walk in. This is the kitchen, which has no original fabric. This is actually the rear addition wing. And you can see that there's been quite a bit of water damage in the past, obviously coming in through the ceiling, pooling in the insulation, and then eventually resulted in the ceiling collapse there. The rest of the house, even the historic portion, so this is a family room or living room type setup. Again, nothing original. Even the masonry looks to be from the 20th century. So over time, you know, as this building changed hands and had different owners, there were a number of changes seen to be, I'm sure, improvements at the time that were made to the building. The only place we start to see any of the heritage features are upon gaining access to the second floor. So this shot here shows the hallway landing at the top, which is maintains its form in terms of the layout. You've got this central hall, and then you have 4 different bedrooms. So the second floor is really broken up into quadrants. And much of the staircase seems to be original. You know, it's that really, really narrow staircase that I think most of us can relate to older buildings we've been in. And it looks like it's got the original handrail, but other than that, there's really not much. Each of the rooms looks like this. You've got 1 window in each. Like I said, the windows do have some age. Most of them have broken panes. So there's not much there in terms of anything that could be sort of scavenged or saved prior to a demolition. So in terms of options and what we need to consider here, we really only have 2 options, and that is 1, sign off on the demolition request, or 2, designate the property. And it's my position after visiting this property and doing a bit of research that we don't really have the grounds for designation. Looking at Ontario Regulation 906, which lays out the criteria, we have very limited historical value here that we know of. In terms of architectural value, there's very, very little that could be salvaged. And in terms of its context, again, because this is a landlocked parcel, this building can't really be appreciated by anyone. So it's always a disappointing thing for me when these types of applications come in, because, you know, I'd love to see a building like this find new life, but we're not in a position where we can really, you know, dictate that happens unless we're willing to go to a stage where we are going to designate it. And unfortunately, in this case, I don't think there's any merit to designation, because there's really not that much there to preserve anymore. So because this isn't technically listed on our heritage inventory, we don't need an official motion from the committee. But given that this is an 1875 building, you know, I did feel it was very important that I get it in front of the committee, find out if people have any questions, or if there is in fact any opposition to demolition of this building. So with that, I'll kind of open it up to any questions and comments that people may have. Nothing else?
Hello.
Neil has something.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
Michael-
sorry. We've got you on mute, Anderson, just in case anyone else raises a hand. Yes, Neil.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm just looking on Google Map. It's owned by somebody called Unix Sheet Metal and Eaves Troughing. Are they going to do, apart from knocking it down, are they going to do anything with that site? You know?
So I was talking with the gentleman on site, and he mentioned that they'll just be using that portion of the property as a parking area. And the reality with this property is the entire thing sits within the floodplain. So it's all TRCA regulated property. I think that it would be very unlikely that they'd actually be permitted to build anything there. So if I go all the way back here and show you the full context of the property. So they currently have a sort of big metal industrial building right now that they operate out of right there, which is at the very edge of the property. The house, as I mentioned, is there. Pretty much everything else you have along there is all storage. And even this storage use is really only there, I think, because of historical precedent. Nothing like this would ever be permitted right now due to the state of this being in the floodplain. If they did want to build anything, I think they'd have their work cut out for them in terms of getting the permits required from TRCA and also from the town.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
That amount of decay, is that only after a year or is it a couple of years for the building to get that bad?
I think most of it has been more recent, so in the last year. But I assume there would have been some sort of impetus to get the last tenants out. So, usually if people are living somewhere and it seems to be a good accommodation and there aren't any major issues, that's going to continue happening. So my guess is maybe the term came up there. There were a number of building deficiencies, and there was probably a sort of decision point that landed with the owner at one point saying, is it worth investing in it to keep somebody in there? Or has the time come and we need to start looking at other arrangements? That's my suspicion, but I don't know with any certainty. I would assume, based on the amount of water in that basement, that's been an issue for some time. It could have filled up to the point that it's at now over the last year, but anytime a basement is capable of getting that wet, there tends to be a history of that happening seasonally anyways.
Yeah, because some of that stuff, when we saw the basement, it looked like there was mold and so on the walls.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was littered in mold. And that was something that the owner mentioned as well. Like the state of the basement was no surprise to him, even though he said personally he hadn't opened the doors for a year. So, he knew it was going to be pretty bad in there. And interesting, so this is just sort of a side note, but interesting, bylaw was out there at the same time doing an inspection, because now when there are demolitions in town, bylaw goes out to look for any animals that may be living in the buildings, just to ensure when the building's demolished, you don't have a situation where you have, rodents and that sort of thing, looking for new homes in the adjacent buildings. So their inspection came out all clear. Really wasn't too much going on in there in terms of wildlife, which is a good thing, because that could have made for a really interesting inspection.
No respectable raccoon would live in there.
No.
So Mike, given all that water damage, like structurally, what's that building looking like? Is it something that was gonna probably like fall over on itself anyways in the next year or two?
I would think that rear addition is probably on its last legs. Like when you have that level of collapse happening on the inside, everything's connected. So when one thing goes, it all starts to sort of feel the ill effects from that. When the door was first opened and I looked in and saw that, I thought, okay, well, there's no way I'm going up to the second floor. But then upon sort of walking around and getting a sense of the layout, I realized very quickly, okay, no, this is all the back addition, which is in the worst shape. The part that really, really is upsetting in a way to me, because like I said, I hate seeing these buildings disappear. Going up to the second floor, the second story where the heritage fabric, at least some of it still remained, was by far the part of the building that was in the best shape. It was entirely dry. When I opened the door, so there was a door to that staircase that kind of kept everything sealed off. And as soon as I opened that door, I got that smell that you always get in old heritage homes where it's kind of like aging wood, similar to like an older church if you've been in those.
Right.
And just a very, very familiar smell and a good smell to me because it means things are dry, right? You're not getting the mildew and the mold and that sort of thing. So it was quite upsetting knowing that, this building's likely not going to be any longer, but portions of it are in pretty good shape. And I think that's also in part due to the fact that the owners, as was just mentioned, own an eaves trough and soffit and fascia company. So when you look at all the changes that have happened over time, there's been a lot of good weather protection for this building, at least the front portion, over the last few years. It's got vinyl siding on it and all kinds of sort of modern materials, which do tend to be a bit better at keeping out the wet. But yeah, going back to your original question, the rear portion is definitely going to go sometime soon. And even though the historic portion's in a lot better shape, any building that's left uninhabited and with no heating and no cooling and in this case broken windows and access to birds and raccoons and everything, it's not going to last very long.
Mike, sorry, I was raising my hand a few times. I didn't want to interrupt. Quick question. So by no means am I going to support designating this property, but if we were to, and the repairs had to be done, who's going to foot that bill, the town or the owner?
That would be all on the owner.
Okay.
Yeah. So and it's an interesting scenario because when you designate a property, you can essentially require the preservation of existing features, but you can't necessarily require restoration. So we could say to them that we think those jerkin head gables are important, so we need them to be preserved. Well, they would be within their rights to just keep the building in its existing form and not do anything, and they're preserving the gables. So, I mean, if we were to take an approach like that, we wouldn't necessarily even end up with a better product or a fully restored building over time. It just could be sort of an undue burden for the property owners.
So that property, that land, the northern part facing onto Kingston Road, is this owned by the same people that owns that building? Like the big chunk of land?
The big chunk of land here?
That one right there, yeah.
No, this is owned by the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority.
So is the part that he's on, right?
No, it's covered by their permitting area. So they have covered, because this is all, actually this whole neighborhood is in a floodplain. So the Toronto Region Conservation Authority have the right to review any applications, and they will have to issue permits for anything that happens on any of these properties that are privately held. But this property here is actually owned by them. They have full control. So I would assume, given their mandate and the work that they do, they wouldn't be able to justify ever building in a floodplain. Flood protection is part of their mandate. So this here will never be developed and will likely remain in its current state, sort of like just an open space parcel here.
Isn't that the same kind of property or land, TRC floodlands, that the Pickering Flea Market was built on?
It would be similar, yeah. So any lands that fall within the floodplain have jurisdiction from the conservation authority in the area. So yeah, it would be a very similar thing.
Why I said that, because the new owner for the Rona property, he originally bought it to put an electronics store, and I met with him last week. But instead, all the people from the flea market, just inside the information, they asked him to open a flea market there. So he is converting that into a flea market right now. It's just sort of so similarly related, because that land is a mess as well to where the Rona is, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the same, that Rona property, just as I mentioned, because it's within the floodplain as well, any alterations that he would be proposing to that property would have to get permitted from TRCA.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, thanks for all that information. Yeah, I makes no sense keeping that building as beautiful as the head is, right?
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sam's got a question.
Not so much a question as a comment. It's too bad that somebody couldn't salvage the wood that's from the staircase, et cetera. And I'm wondering if that's being a consideration. I mean, you know, if it's dry, that's all pretty thick, you know, decent wood. So could that be a suggestion?
So yeah,
Listen.
that's an interesting question, because that's usually where my mind goes as well. As soon as I recognize that something's heading towards demolition, I did have that conversation with the owner, and he seemed to be quite well aware of the fact that, you know, a lot of these features are sort of old growth wood, very good quality wood,
Right.
and that there is a demand for it in things like the arts community. So my expectation is that, you know, prior to demolition, he'll do what he needs to do to, you know, get some of those features into the right hands. But in terms of our involvement in that process, there's
Yeah.
no real clear way for us to get involved. It did remind me, though, about my days on the City of Pickering Heritage Advisory Committee. So I sat for a number of years as a member on that committee, and whenever we had demolitions, we tried to salvage materials as the city. Now, the difference between us and them, I think, is that Pickering has a museum as well. So like a heritage museum where they have lots of old buildings. So whenever we came across windows or handrails or, you know, interior trim that was part of a building that was going to be demolished, we would ask that that be removed and stored at the Heritage Village, because there was actually a place for it to go. In our case, you know, there's not necessarily anywhere for it to be held. And beyond that, it's hard to say what would happen to this material over time. Would we just be storing it somewhere? But
Well, can I
sorry,
just
go ahead.
make just comment? So the Bryant House, which sat on the property that Costco now has a parking lot, that was a beautiful little house, and I still resent the fact that it was demolished. But anyway, that was a condition that was placed when that was demolished, that there had to be salvage. And
Okay.
salvage from that house was offered to owners of heritage buildings and designated buildings within the town of Ajax. And it was quite interesting because a lot of people came forward. Now, the popular things like the cupboards that were glass faced were picked up pretty quickly, but and it was all stored. I think there was a shack that was on the front of that, and the frontage of that particular property we're talking about. That's where it all went. And the town just put out a notice to, you know, the people that owned heritage buildings, said we've got, you know, material, and they picked it up.
I love that idea, and that's kind of where I was going, or I was going to take the conversation, is
Sorry.
perhaps that's something that we want to consider as a committee, coming up with some sort of salvage strategy, because it is really a shame. Hopefully we don't have too many of these scenarios where these older buildings are getting demolished. But when that does happen, it is a shame to see some of these materials potentially disappear. This one in particular, like we saw, there's elements of a handrail and there's some damaged windows, but there's not really much else. Like there's absolutely no interior trim remaining as far as I could see. So a lot of the stuff that's most in demand doesn't seem to be available. But yeah, I think that would be a great idea for us as a committee to look into some sort of strategy to ensure that we don't miss any opportunities in the future.
Big, beautiful treads on the staircase there. So
yeah. So I don't see any other.
Well, just one other comment. What's you know, we do have a rodent problem in Ajax right now. When I looked at that building, and the minute you showed us that basement, I cringed, right? Because we're dealing with that rat infestation right now. So what are the next steps for this if we decide to move forward with the demolition, Mike?
So I'll have to sign off on the demolition, and the demolition also gets routed to the various departments and agencies within the town to be signed off. That's, as I mentioned before, why bylaw was there to do their inspection. Um, and there was no large rodents or anything. The owner was saying he thinks that a raccoon does make its way into the house occasionally, but things like raccoons are obviously just going to make their way back into the natural environment. It's really
Yeah.
the rats and larger rodents that we're concerned with, and there didn't seem to be evidence of anything like that. So that shouldn't be an issue following demolition.
What's a larger rodent? What's a larger rodent? What is that?
Well,
Hmm.
rats are usually what we're looking for, but you also have things like, I don't know if it actually falls into the rodent family, but things like possums as well, which are fairly commonplace now. And, you know,
Skunk.
skunk, anything like that, that could create a bit of a hazard. If it's not used to living in a natural environment, like most of those animals will make their way into the natural environment and, find new homes. Things like rats are going to look for other buildings. So
Yeah.
that seems to be the main concern, and in particular, that's what bylaw was looking for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So the only other item we had was the Heritage Minute videos, and I can sort of jump in or take the lead at the outset for that. I did provide the video to our communications team and request that they look into a few things, those being some sort of unified branding for the videos. So things like, having an introduction, in terms of having certain backings or certain projections on the video at the beginning and at the end. They said they could put that together. They can also put together the closed captioning, and they can ensure that the video does appear on all of our social media channels. So we've had some very early conversations in terms of how much content the committee will be providing. And I had said that, these videos do take a bit of time and they take quite a bit of work to get moving. So I provided an estimate of maybe 2 videos a year. I'll rely on you guys to let me know if you think that's the neighborhood or that's the ballpark we want to be looking at. But in the end, we have their full support. I will be hearing back from them in a little more detail in the next couple of weeks to hear exactly what they have planned for that first video, which was the Quaker Meeting House.
Great, great. I guess talking to my fellow members, we can probably do more than 1 a year or 2 a year for that matter. And with that in mind, I have a rough cut of our most recent project, which is the St. Francis de Sales Center, which we're going to share with you in a minute. So. You should be seeing the St. Francis de Sales Center. I'll play it back for you.
Jeff, you might have to also share your audio if there is audio with it, because we're not hearing anything.
Okay, 1 second. Katie? Just sharing audio here.
So Jeff, when you hit the share screen,
Mhm.
there's usually a little button in the bottom left-hand corner that also says share audio. And you might have to click
There
that
it
when
is,
you're sharing
yeah.
the screen.
At least Jeff's got some tech support.
The best.
It's hard to find reliable help.
So we'll play it now. You should hear something in a second.
This is an Ajax Historical Minute. History is everywhere in our community, and the next stop is St. Francis de Sales Church in Pickering Village. The first Catholic church in Pickering was St. Wilfrid, a wooden church that burned down before the big church was finished. A The surviving cemetery on Notion Road has many early settlers who escaped the potato famine. The church was finally completed in 1871 by architect Henry Langley at a cost of $8,300 or $180,000 in modern currency. It was the only Catholic church in the area, with the faithful traveling from miles around to attend services. Parishioners donated bricklaying and carpentry skills and hauled local red clay brick from Whitby. High Victorian Gothic in style, its unique features include an octagonal church spire covered with polychromatic slate, trefoils, Gothic arched stained glass windows donated by founding families, and a rare feature in church design, 3 rose-colored window dormers set in steeply pitched roof. The rectory where St. Francis de Sales School now stands was destroyed by fire in 1913. In 1999, the building was designated an Ajax Heritage Structure, and in 2007, the town purchased it. The building underwent restoration, transforming into the St. Francis Center, a community art, cultural, and performance venue. Features include retractable theater seating for 150, a stage, theatrical lights, sound and audiovisual capabilities, and a professional kitchen. The new glass facade showcases modern building trends. St. Francis de Sales Center is the first publicly owned and accessible heritage facility in Ajax, a place to perform or be entertained. Be sure to catch our next Heritage Minute as we uncover the history of our town.
So that is a rough cut. There's a few embellishments which my members, I'm sure, have noticed that aren't there, small details. But typically, they're fun to make, and we can certainly do at least 2 a year, if not 3. We have the technology and the depth of knowledge to do it. Anyway, that's the rough cut, guys. And any feedback?
That's good.
Jeff,
Very well done, Jeff and Pam, I guess, for some of the scripting on there.
Yeah.
It was very well done.
Great. Well, that's many thanks to
it's good.
Pam.
No, it's fine. It's fun to do, like you said, and I think that the St. Francis is timely.
So I guess I'll add a few more embellishments to it, and then we'll launch it on YouTube just so it's there, and get a copy to the staff.
So
One
I have
thing I would-
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
did you want to go ahead, Pam?
The one thing I was going to ask, is it possible to get inside to take a picture of the windows at night? Because, the pictures during the day when they're lit from outside, they're really pretty.
Absolutely, probably have to be with permission. We have
Yeah.
to get in there with the staff facilitator, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
We ran into the same challenge with the meeting house, was getting in during times of COVID is difficult, but anything is possible. We'll just see how the COVID situation changes over the next little while.
Yeah, that's
Good
one of
idea.
the most notable things about that church, in my opinion, is that the windows are beautiful, and they have a lot of the early families' names on them. So
For the chair,
it's really
Sarah,
nice.
what I could do is reach out to Robert Gruber, who's the manager of community and cultural development, and see if he has any file photos of interior shots of the facility, just in the meantime, if that would help expedite the process instead of waiting until we might get physical access. And then maybe he might have something on file that you could look to include.
If it's digital, we can use it.
Perfect. I'll see what I can find.
Jeff, since I've, sorry, Mike, can I go ahead?
Sure, go ahead, Councilor
Yeah,
Clark.
since I've been on this committee, this is the second beautiful video I've seen. And it's a shame that I can't share this on council and show off to my council members what great work we do here at the Heritage Advisory Committee. Sarah, is this something that can be arranged? Can we just get an opportunity to show these videos off? It's going to be on the worldwide video afterwards as well, so people can really see the work that you're doing. It's too good to let it just be a secret. What do you think?
Through the chair, I wholeheartedly agree. And I believe that's what Mike is working on behind the scenes with our communications team. They're looking to polish off the first video and get that ready to launch online through the social media channels we have here at the town. And great to see the second one near completion as well, because once they have the formatting all set from the first video, I'm sure it won't be too much work to get the second one out there.
That is great news. Thank you. Great job, Jeff. Thank you, guys.
Great.
We'll let Mike go first, and then we'll go over to Pam, because Mike had something to say when Councillor Khan was jumping in. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Anderson. So just a suggestion or something to look into on one of the images that was shown as part of that video. So near the beginning, there's discussion about the first church being a small wooden church. And I believe, I may not be right on this, but I believe that church was located in what is now the St. Wilfrid's Cemetery on Notion Road. So Notion Road has two cemeteries. There's one called St. Wilfrid's, which is near the north end, and then there's the St. Francis one, which is at the south end. So the image that you showed, I believe, was of the plaque in the St. Francis Cemetery, but it might be worthwhile of having the actual image depict St. Wilfrid Cemetery, since that's where the wooden church was originally located.
I can
So,
do
and
that.
that may have to be verified. I can look into
think-
that just to confirm.
Yeah, so one of the books that Bruce lent me, that's where that information came from, that the original church was St. Wilfrid's and where it was. I mean, we can, Bruce, do you know?
Bruce, you're on mute.
Bruce, do you know where the original, I think, I can't remember, I'd have to go through and see again, but I think that the first Catholic church was St. Wilfrid's, and it was falling down when they built the St. Francis. So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. You're saying show at the beginning of the St. Wilfrid's Cemetery?
Yeah, so when that storyline is playing out through the narration, there's an image that shows the St. Francis Cemetery plaque. And I'm saying perhaps we should show the St. Wilfrid Cemetery plaque, because that's actually where the historic church was located.
And so the St. Wilfrid's is the old cemetery that is behind the fence that's locked and you can't get in, right?
I'm not sure of the state of the fencing. I know that the last time I was there, I was able to walk in.
Really? I
Yeah.
couldn't, my husband said he wouldn't take me to the hospital if it climbed the fence. So I couldn't get in.
At the
But-
very least, I think I do have, I'll check my files to see if I have an image of that plaque. I believe I do, but I could
Okay.
send that over to you.
Because I think some of the stones that are in St. Wilfrid Cemetery, now what I read was that it underwent some, I don't know, realignment. They pulled all the stones together in the middle. And, but I thought, like, I couldn't get in, but I think some of the names might be interesting on some of those stones, because they'd be the very early families.
Yeah, so I know I do have a couple images of the headstones themselves, and like you said, they have been. I think they follow almost sort of an arc sort of layout,
Yeah.
or like a semicircular layout. I do have a few photos of those stones, but I'm assuming I have a photo of the plaque as well. But that was the original
Yeah.
Catholic cemetery, and tied to the original Catholic Church. So I thought it just may make sense to show that plaque rather than the other.
Okay. It was locked when I went by. So.
Okay.
I will be looking for some feedback from you guys about our next profile. I'll come up with some ideas, but anybody who has a contribution, we're all ears. So I leave it to you guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
I-
Yes,
I
Pam,
do
go
have
ahead.
another question. So what about, who's looking after the archives now?
Are you volunteering?
No,
Yeah,
but I'm just thinking like, I mean, there's, you know, we managed to get a lot of really images, especially for the old Quaker Meeting House, through the archives. So I'm wondering, you know, who do we contact, or how do we get that assistance for future ones? Because when you're talking about a subject building, you want to make sure you've got enough pictures, you know, to support enough imagery. So just wondering.
I can speak to that. It's the understanding that the archive portfolio will right now remain with Legislative Services. I imagine at some point in the future, there will be recruitment for the vacancy in the position. So if there is any information that's necessary, you can either go through Mike or myself, and we'll make sure in the interim that we can connect you with the appropriate resources that you're requesting.
Okay, great. And I have one more question. What is the oldest building in the town?
Ooh,
So the oldest building in the town is the, oh, why is the name escaping me right now?
Old Post Inn?
Old Post Inn, that's it.
It is, eh?
So, and its date, I forget what it's rumored to be, but I think it's the 18 teens or early 1812.
1812.
Okay, so that's what we have recorded. I've always been skeptical of that date. That seems very early for that building. And I remember at one point I did come across a report that said a similar thing and dated it somewhere in the 1830s. Regardless, it's still the oldest building in the town, so it doesn't make that much of a difference. But there's, once we get into the 1840s, then we get a whole handful of other buildings. We have a number of stone buildings throughout the town that were built in the 1840s.
Okay. So the Old Post Inn was the building I thought would be maybe a next candidate, or you know, in the next few, because I thought it was the oldest. And it is also on a well-traveled route that would have a lot of visibility. But the only problem is I think that I can only think of one old picture of it.
I know we have, I'm not sure what we have in the way of historic photos, like very, very old photos, but this would be a great one because of the story that can be told about its restoration and about, you know, being moved slightly. And I believe we have a whole whack of photos going back to all that work that was done 15 or 20 years ago, or however long ago it was. So I think there'll be lots of visual supports that we have access to if that is in fact the building we decide to go with next.
Well, the other thing is the Post family were quite prominent along Kingston Road. So there is the Post Manor in Pickering. The house that is now, I can't remember, Heritage Kitchen, is that it? On Kingston Road, that's Post Architect. And they have the drawings with the Post Architect seal and everything. And then the building across the road was all Post family as well. So anyway.
sounds like a good candidate.
yeah, I just did a Google search on it and there's a ton of pictures, so.
Awesome.
All right, any further questions on item 4.2? I do not see any, so we're gonna move on to correspondence, which I believe there is none. And then we're gonna go up to point number 6 on the agenda, which is an update from council. So Councillor Khan, you do have the stage right now. It's all yours.
Thank you. Nothing much to bring. It's very smooth sailing for Ajax. I just want to remind you, we have the spring cleanup challenge happening from April to June. The town spring cleanup toolkits are back and ready for pickup. Help us Ajax clean and green. Perfect activity for individuals and our families. No groups permitted. Participants should follow all COVID public health guidelines, including gathering limits. If you want to participate, contact operations@ajax.ca and you'll get your toolkit, your gloves and bags ready. And also don't forget, we have the contactless compost giveaway, which is May 29th for all you gardeners. So at the Operations Center again at 800 Salem Road North. And that's May 29th from 8:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. So you can register and pick up your compost for free for Ajax residents only. And that is my contribution on updates. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Khan. I don't see anyone having any questions or comments, so we're going to move on to number 7, which is other business. Does anyone have any other business to bring forward to the committee? Yes, Beverly.
I just wanted to bring up the point that I saw in the Toronto Star. I think it started last week. They were doing write-ups about heritage trees. And the first one they touched on was our oak tree at the Harwood Point Gardens, the one at the bottom of the Harwood. It was kind of nice to see that was first, and the guy deliberately came out or intentionally came out to take a good picture of it. And anybody who's been a resident in Ajax has a picture of that tree in the snow, in the sun, anything. So it was just nice to see that. Did anybody else see it in the paper?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
That's all I have.
Well, thanks for that, Beverly. It certainly is a very positive one that you bring forward to us, so thank you. If there is no other business from anyone else, this will conclude our meeting for today. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Camille, and a seconder? Pam, thank you. All in favor? Perfect. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 2nd, 2021. And as of right now, it's still going to be electronic.
Have a good night.